What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. This week, we have an extra large episode for you. So we're going to talk about even more iOS 17.2 beta features and changes. We're going to talk about why text messages on the iPhone will never be the same, iOS 18 and why it might be an update for the ages, sideloading is not going to be what you think, another crazy AirTag story, and more. And as always, if you want to stay updated with all things going on in the world of Apple, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss next week's episode, and also make sure to go to theappledin.com and sign up for the free newsletter if you want to get all of the latest Apple news delivered straight to your inbox completely free. All right, so let's start with even more iOS 17.2 features and changes. We are currently on the third beta. The final public release is not coming until December. So right now we are on the third beta. And the first thing I want to discuss is a change inside of our settings. If we head into Safari, if we go down to the clear history and website data tab, you will see that we have the clear time frame and also the clear for profile right here. Now that is not new. However, what is new is that your settings stick for the next time. So before, this would reset after every time you did it, but now they stick. And you will see that right when I went in here, today was checked off. So if I change this to today and yesterday, and I go to leisure, for example, and I go to clear history, the next time I go into that, you can see that today and yesterday is checked off. So it remembers what you did last and keeps that selected. Also, I wanted to mention that in 17.2, this whole section is very laggy. Like, take a look at when I go out of here, it kind of is like not taking up the full resolution of the screen. And same with when I go in there, you can see it's kind of choppy. So I would imagine that will be fixed by the time 17.2 launches, because that is, looks really bad. It doesn't even look like iOS. So maybe I'll report that in the feedback application. And then we also have another minor change in the settings if you go into the phone or the FaceTime settings. So we're going to go into phone, and you'll see right here, we have share name and photo. So this is not a new setting by any means, but it's a new section inside of the phone and the FaceTime settings. So if you go into here, this is going to be where you can change your contact poster if you want to share that with everybody or just with contacts. And then if we go into the FaceTime section right here, you can see we have the same thing, except you have to swipe down a little bit and it's below the caller ID and it says share name and photo. And then of course I covered all the other changes in my what's new video, but I did also want to talk about the issue that's going on right now with wireless charging. So if you guys remember last week, we talked about how Apple released 17.1.1, and one of the bugs that update fixed was wireless charging in BMW cars. So there's a big issue with when you would wirelessly charge in a BMW, it would kind of mess up your iPhone 15. And it looks like a similar issue is going on right now with GM cars, and wireless charging is broken for iPhone 15 models. Now keep in mind, this issue is not near as severe as the BMW issue, because that would cause issues with the NFC chip where you couldn't use Apple Pay and things like that. This issue is just simply not allowing you to wirelessly charge your iPhone 15. So I highly doubt that Apple's going to push out an update just to fix an issue like this. They'll probably just fix this with 17.2. Now I do also want to talk about watchOS 10.2 beta 3. This is the latest watchOS beta, and this brings back a feature that many people were very disappointed was removed in watchOS 10, and that is the swiping over to change the watch face. So that is now back. Before on watchOS, you could not, swipe over to change to your next watch face and go back to the previous one, but now you can. There is a new setting under settings clock, and you can see it is swipe to switch watch face. Now, as far as performance goes, I'm really not seeing any difference with beta 3 here from beta 2, so I'm not going to waste your time in talking about this. You can see the latest benchmark scores right there, nothing crazy. Now, I do want to talk about the battery life, because battery life actually has improved here on beta 3, not just for me personally, but also for a lot of users who have responded to me on YouTube comments, on the Discord server, on my Apple Den newsletter. A lot of people are saying that beta 3 has resolved their battery issues. And keep in mind, people say there's battery issues with every single version ever. Apple could make a literal, perfect iOS version and people will still have issues with battery life. But nonetheless, people are seeing an improvement with battery life in beta 3. So hopefully that means that everybody is seeing that same improvement. If not, let me know in a comment down below. I'm curious to see how battery life is for you. But for me personally, I really have no complaints. And I'll bring up my main device here as well, which I am running 17.2 17.2 beta 3 on my main device as well. And you can see, I mean, not a huge difference in terms of battery usage going from beta 2 to beta 3, but you can see my usage right there. Okay, so before we get into the juicy news of the week, let's talk about what to expect next from Apple. So next up is going to be 17.2 beta 4, and I am not expecting to see that next week. Now, yes, we were technically on a 1-week release schedule for last week for the previous beta, but next week is the week of Thanksgiving, and Apple does typically skip that week when it comes to software updates. So for that reason, I would expect to see the next beta on the week of November 27th, most likely right there on November 28th. And that will very likely be the final beta before the RC, which I would expect to see the following week on the week of December 4th. And then we should see the final public release of 17.2 probably right there on December 11th, but it really could come any day that week. All right, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And let's start with iOS 18. Yes, we are 7 months away from seeing iOS 18 debut at the Worldwide Developers Conference in June, but we're now getting pretty exciting news, honestly, about iOS 18 and how it could be a, quote, groundbreaking update. So here's what Mark Gurman's Bloomberg had to say. After a few years of modestly sized updates to iOS, the next version of the iPhone and iPad software could be relatively groundbreaking. Internally, Apple's senior management has described its upcoming operating systems as, quote, ambitious and compelling, with major new features and designs, in addition to security and performance improvements. So that sounds awesome, and we really haven't heard Apple's management or really anybody at Apple describe a software update like that before, at least not that I can remember, and I keep track of all this news. So I don't know, that sounds exciting to me, and I think this plays, you know, part of this is because of all the AI that Apple has been working on. Apple has been working heavily on AI, more specifically generative AI in the background. So I would imagine that iOS 18 is going to have a major emphasis on AI. So we could see a complete revamp of Siri, maybe a, you know, app to go along with Siri. I'm not really sure how Apple's going to do this. And we've also heard that some of these features might be exclusive to the iPhone 16. So we'll have to kind of, you know, see how this is going to go. But I think AI is going to be a major part of iOS 18. However, let's remember last week, Apple did pause iOS 18 development for a full week, which indicates that Apple is very serious about making, you know, this next major release as stable as possible. And a lot of people have been wondering, you know, is this delay in development of iOS 18 because Apple wants to focus on these bugs? Does that mean we're not going to get a final shipped version until later, like later than September, like we normally do? And that appears to not be the case, according to Gurman. He said that the delay probably won't noticeably postpone the ultimate release of the software, and he said that the worst case scenario is that Apple will have, quote, a little less time at the end of the development cycle to eliminate any last minute glitches. So that's kind of counterintuitive to what we're hearing about this software being super stable and super reliable. If they're not going to have enough time to, you know, smoothing out all these bugs at the end, could we not see as stable of a release as we're expecting? I don't know. iOS 18 is going to be a very interesting software to watch, I think more than the past few years, just because of all the talk about it and all the hype we're putting into this. But let's be real, you know, at the end of the day, there's hype every single year for the iOS software, and almost every year a lot of people are let down. So we'll just have to wait and see, but I will have to say that I am very excited for iOS 18, and I was not really excited for iOS 16 or 17. So this is going to be the first time in a few years where I'm genuinely excited for the next iOS release. And we, of course, cannot talk about iOS 18 and Apple in 2024 without mentioning sideloading, because a lot of people were getting very excited when we saw code pop up in 17.2 beta, I think it was beta 2, and it was kind of implying that we could be seeing sideloading as soon as iOS 17.2. However, that was quickly dismissed because that appeared to be for organizational use and not for personal use. However, Mark Gurman has some details about what's coming in relation to sideloading in 2024. So he's reporting that sideloading will be available to EU users in the first half of 2024. However, that is not going to carry over to the US or other countries, unfortunately. And the reason being is because Apple only has to comply to the EU law, the EU regulations, and that doesn't apply here in the US. Now, of course, sideloading, if you're not sure what sideloading is, sideloading gives customers the ability to download applications without having to use the App Store, which means that developers are going to make a lot more money because they don't have to pay Apple's 15 to sometimes 30% tax. So if you were getting your hopes up for sideloading and you don't live in the EU, this is pretty bad news because it looks like we're not going to be getting sideloading, at least for the time being, in any other country besides the EU. So you guys know how Apple has been working on their own in-house 5G modem for many years now. They've been working on this for a while, and it appears that they hit another snag, and we're going to have another delay for this modem. According to Bloomberg, Apple is going to miss an extended spring 2025 launch timeline, so the modem chip launch is now expected around the end of 2025 or early 2026, and Apple is still planning to introduce the technology in a version of the new low-cost iPhone SE. And if you remember, the first time we talked about Apple's in-house 5G modem, it was supposed to be for the iPhone SE4, which was supposed to come out, I believe, at the beginning of 2023 or maybe even the end of 2022, and that's been delayed so many times, and it looks like we're still potentially going to see this modem debut on an iPhone SE. So that could mean we might not even see an iPhone SE4 in 2024 if this is the case. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out, but Apple's 5G modem, when they can build that in-house, that is going to be a massive deal, a huge deal, not just for their profit margins, but also for us in terms of connectivity and, 5G and all that. It's going to, in theory, improve greatly. Okay, so now we have to discuss the biggest news story of the week and something that I think was pretty much the unthinkable for Apple, and that is the fact that we now have confirmation that Apple will be adding RCS support to iOS and the iPhone next year. So RCS stands for Rich Communication Services, and this is a communication protocol that Google created back in 2007 to replace the SMS and MMS standard from 2002. So that, of course, is the standard that Apple still uses to this day, and that's what leads to the 160 character limit when you send a message to an Android user when you're not using iMessage. Basically, you have the character limit, you have the major limitations and compression when it comes to photos, and especially with videos. You'll notice that if you send a video from an iPhone to an Android, the quality is downright terrible because only so much data can be passed through via MMS. But all of that and more is going to be changing next year. So an Apple spokesman told 9to5Mac, later next year, we will be adding support for RCS Universal Profile, the standard as currently published by the GSM Association. And they go on to say that this is going to work alongside iMessage, which will continue to be the best and most secure messaging experience for Apple users. Okay, so let's break this down. How does RCS benefit us? Well, first off, if you're sending an iMessage, a message from an iPhone user to another iPhone user, or just, if they're on a Mac or whatever, the blue bubbles. If you're sending blue bubbles all the time, this means nothing to you. This is not going to change anything at all for you. This is only going to change the whole experience when you have green bubbles. That's the simplest way I can put this. So there's some pretty major advantages here with RCS. Number one is that your pictures and especially your videos are not going to be compressed to death, and it's not going to look like you shot that video on a potato. You're going to see pretty much the full quality now when you send a video to an Android user or in a group chat with an Android user. And again, you're not going to have the 160 character limit, but you're also going to get typing indicators and read receipts. So just like you get on iMessage, now when you text somebody on an Android, we're going to have real read receipts and also real typing indicators. And we've already had the tap back actions, but I would assume that those are going to get better as well. When you do like the haha or the love or whatever, that's probably going to improve as well. And another big advantage of having RCS support is the fact that you can send messages over Wi-Fi. You do not need a cell signal like you do to send SMS or MMS messages. So it's going to be very similar to iMessage, which is great. However, it's not going to be as secure as iMessage. So Apple is going to work on this and help them make this standard more secure. So it is important to note that, this is kind of the big catch with RCS, by the way. It's not going to be as secure as iMessage, but Apple did say that they're working with, this whole protocol and trying to make it more secure and better. They're not going to put their own proprietary software on top of RCS. It's just going to be basic RCS like everybody else has. And I wanted to wrap up this story by saying, why now? Why is Apple doing this now? We've been wanting RCS support for the past, forever. For the past 10 years, we've been wanting RCS support, if not longer. So why is Apple doing this now? And I'd say that don't rule out the power of the EU. Think about it. We just got USB-C on the iPhone. We're getting sideloading for, at least devices in the EU. this could have something to do with the impending legislature with the EU in terms of Apple with their gatekeeping, messaging platform with iMessage. So that could play a pretty big role here. And I don't really like speculating a lot, but I think that the EU definitely plays a role in this decision. But I think also Apple realizes they're not really going to lose any money from this. Like I have seen a lot of people saying, oh, great, I can switch to Android now. But the reality is, it's still not iMessage. It's still not the same. It's not going to be the exact same. You're not going to have all the iMessage specific features. So we'll have to wait and see how this pans out and how much better RCS is over SMS, and especially compared to iMessage. There's just a lot to talk about here, but a lot of it is kind of just in theory right now until we can actually see it implemented on the iPhone, which again is coming next year, presumably in iOS 18. But I do also have to ask you, what do you think about RCS coming to the iPhone? Are you excited for it? Do you think it's not a big deal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And before we get into the crazy AirTag story, I did just want to mention that Apple did just announce that they're extending the free period for the iPhone 14 emergency SOS via satellite features. So this originally came with 2 free years of service, but now it looks like Apple is expanding that to give iPhone 14 users an extra year. However, it looks like iPhone 15 customers have not seen an extension for this service. So it may come after the second year for iPhone 15 users, but if you have an iPhone 14, just know that automatically your emergency SOS via satellite subscription, if you want to call it, has been extended. And if you don't have this feature turned on, you need to turn this on right away, because we've covered so many stories here on the channel over the years about how many lives this feature has saved. And me personally, I think that emergency SOS via satellite should be free forever. I think it should not have an expiration date. I think people should not have to pay for this. This saves lives. Apple should be including this for free. Anyways, let's move on to the final story of this episode. And this, of course, is going to be another crazy AirTag story. And this time, the stolen item was not something we've ever seen here on the channel. And it was an 8,000-pound skid steer construction vehicle. And they're calling this a heist. So a construction company was out working a typical residential home demolition in Minneapolis when out of nowhere, their skid steer disappeared in the middle of their demolition. And keep in mind that this machine costs almost $75,000, and it was the construction company's only one. Now, the owner of the company said that it did have an AirTag inside, but it stopped showing its location shortly after the heist. Now, the man also said that many people in the area over the past couple weeks have had similar experiences where their machines were stolen in the blink of an eye right in front of them. Now, police have still not found the suspects, and I don't know if they will, because it seems pretty sophisticated, and you have to be kind of smart. I don't think criminals are smart whatsoever. I'm not saying that, but there's a level of sophistication to steal an 8,000-pound machine in the middle, in broad daylight in the middle of a job without somebody knowing and knowing the AirTag and how to cut off that AirTag. So crazy story. I wish they found the people who did this, but again, like I always say, especially on an expensive $75,000 machine, you should have 2 AirTags in there. Now with these thieves in specific, they're probably smart enough to know that there's a second AirTag in there, but your general thief, your general person who's going to be stealing something from you is never going to guess there's going to be 2 AirTags in one item. So like I always say, hide an AirTag real good and then put a regular AirTag, where somebody can find it. So it kind of throws them off and they don't look for another one. But anyways, guys, there you have it. That is the latest in the world of Apple. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to subscribe to the Apple Den newsletter. It's a free newsletter that I send out every single week. A lot of the stories I cover here in Apple Weekly, I cover a day before. That goes out every Friday morning. I cover a lot of the same stories in video format here that I cover in that newsletter. It's just kind of another way of getting you info in case you miss a video or in case you miss an email. So if you'd like to sign up for that, that is linked down in the description below. Of course, check out brandonbutch.com if you want any of your wallpapers, any of the wallpapers you see on my phone and things like that. So anyways, again, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate if you give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode of Apple Weekly. And happy early Thanksgiving as well. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.